All right, if you would, turn your Bibles to the book of Job, chapter 1. Job, chapter 1. I'm going to begin with just the first verse of this. One of the great books of the Bible. Verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz, and that's not to be confused with Oz, obviously. Uz, if I understand it correctly, was a region down on the far southeast of the Jordan River. A man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright and one who feared God and shunned evil. Job was one of the finest men then, and even if by today's standards, that has ever lived. And in spite of that, God allowed Satan to take from Job everything of value in one day. That would include 7,000 sheep. 7,000. I can't imagine that. I think the largest, I don't know what you call sheep flock, herds, whatever, the largest flock I've ever seen maybe had 60 sheep, and it just seemed like it was amazing to see 60. I cannot even imagine 7,000 sheep. 3,000 camels. 3,000. Imagine how large they are. 500 yoke of oxen. A yoke typically designated 2 animals, sometimes 4. So probably at least 1,000 oxen, maybe more. 500 female donkeys, which were considered the most valuable for obvious reasons. A large household. Servants. We don't know how many, but it's estimated, depending how much property he owned, which was probably quite a bit, he had at least 125 servants under his employ. His estate, by conservative standards, would be valued at somewhere between $40 and $60 million in our currency. And yes, we have men who are much wealthier than that in America and around the world today, but considering in the times of Job, he may have been the richest man on planet Earth at that point in time. But he lost all of that. He lost it all in one day. But the biggest loss by far wasn't the property. It wasn't all the servants. And many of them died as well, by the way. But he lost his children, his 7 sons and 3 daughters. But I want you to note the response of Job to this incredible loss. I'm reading now chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. He worshipped God. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You understand that? Why he was such an outstanding, righteous man. To praise God in the midst of such loss. And you know, things only got worse from there. In chapter 2, verse 7, we read that Satan struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. That's unimaginable. I've only had one boil, to my knowledge, in my whole life. It was under my right arm. And I'm telling you, that was so painful that for several days I could not put my arm down. It just hurt too much. I can imagine being covered with boils. And again, how did Job respond to that? And I'm going to read from chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. By the way, that's what the devil thought he would do. That's what the whole thing was all about. Satan challenging God. Saying, you know, you take everything away from Job. You take away your hand of protection, he'll curse you. And his wife said to do that, but not Job. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips, which was, of course, what Satan knew he would do, and he did. But things went downhill from there. You remember the three friends that came? In fact, I'll read at verse 11 from chapter 2. Now when Job's three friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and comfort him. That was their plan, neither of which did they do. They ended up tormenting Job by accusing of every possible sin, as we would say in the book, because they felt no one could suffer like Job did unless God were explicitly punishing him for one or a great number of sins. And so they tried, in essence, to get Job to fess up, to admit what he had done that caused God to do all this. And Job was guilty of nothing. Now, we all know that the end of the story was dramatically different. Chapter 42, verse 12 tells us, now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. His health was restored. His previous possessions were doubled. So now his value, or then his value in today's money, would be well over $100 million, maybe more than that. But far more importantly, those 7 sons and 3 daughters that he lost, he received 7 more sons and 3 more daughters were born to him. His friends that had accused him were chastised by God. In fact, they became diseased, and Job actually had to pray that God would heal them for their offenses. And most of all, the devil was humiliated. Job's story serves as a real-life example of a fulfillment of one of the greatest promises to God's people in all the Bible, Romans 8:28. And we know that all things, including the bad, work together for good to those that love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Now, sometimes the good means that adverse circumstances work out by the help of God. They either improve or they're resolved totally or even greatly improved upon. Sometimes that's how God works out good. But more importantly than that, the good that results from all the things that happen may be for our spiritual improvement, our growth, our learning, our maturation in Jesus Christ. Do you know one great example of that in the New Testament is the Apostle Paul? Remember what God allowed to happen to him connected with the devil? 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7. Paul wrote this: a thorn in the flesh, something physical, was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me. The word buffet means to strike, as to cause pain. Something painful was hurting the Apostle Paul. He didn't like it. He disliked it so much he didn't just pray. He pleaded with God 3 times to take this thing away. And what did God do? He didn't take it away. Why? Because the removal of the thorn was not the important thing. The important thing was that Paul learned. And he had some lessons to learn. He learned 3 lessons. Number 1, Paul learned to be more humble. You say, did he need to learn that? Yes. Going back to verse 7, again, 2 Corinthians 12, Paul started the whole conversation with these words. He said, unless, in order to prevent, unless I should be exalted above measure, prideful, arrogant, by the abundance of the revelations, the things that God had let him see. A thorn in the flesh was given to me. Paul finally got it. This was given to me to keep me humble. And number 2, Paul needed to learn that if you have the grace of God, you have everything. What a lesson for us today. in times of adversity or trial or sickness or pain, to know that if we have the grace of God, folks, we are far, far beyond the majority of people who live on planet Earth. In fact, in verse 9, 2 Corinthians 12, God said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you." Which means, Paul, while you're pleading with me to remove the thorn, have you considered lately how rich my grace is toward you? Now, Paul appreciated the grace of God. But God made the point to say, you know what? If you focus more on my grace, this thorn will not bother you nearly as much, which is true. And the third point, lesson Paul needed to learn, is that God does his greatest work in those who have adversity, or trials, or tribulation. Verse 9, same chapter, God said, "For my strength is made perfect in weakness." In other words, I do more work in people who have problems than I do in people who don't. And how did Paul respond to these lessons? Did he appreciate them? I mean, we know he didn't like the thorn. We understand that. How about the lessons? Well, I'm reading verses 9 at the end of verse 9 and 10 of 2 Corinthians 12. He said, "Therefore, knowing these things, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities." This thorn, I don't like it, but I'm going to brag about it. Why? That the power of Christ may rest upon me. Because God's really using me now. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. And you know what? That's one thing Paul knew. All of this that came upon him ultimately was because of his love and faith in Jesus Christ. "For when I am weak," he said, "then I am strong." It's like Paul was saying, now I get it. A lesson we need to learn too at times. I'm not suggesting that Job, Paul, or scores of others mentioned in the Bible who endured severe affliction enjoyed the adversity. And neither do we. But when we understand that God not only promises to work everything out for our good, but that the good often means our spiritual learning and humility and maturation and development, then it becomes a little bit easier to handle those bad times when they come. And I want to share quickly one recent example in my own life where God used an unfortunate event to teach me. I shared part of this on a Wednesday night back many weeks ago. But I was told by at least two people, you need to talk about that in a lesson. And that's where I'm getting to now. Now, this is kind of a trivial example in some ways. But it shows even in a trivial trial how God can teach some important lessons. Back on November 7th of this year, 5.5 weeks ago, something like that, at 12:30 in the afternoon, I was placing some things in my vehicle. As I occasionally do, when my hands are full, I'll put something on top of the vehicle while I can situate other things in the vehicle, which I did. And then I realized I was running late, so I hurriedly got into the vehicle without checking the top of it, and the one thing I'd left on top of the car was my phone. Approximately 6 miles later, while I was driving on Moorville Road, doing about 55 miles an hour, my phone decided it was time to take a flying leap off my vehicle. I didn't know it. I had no idea that I'd left it on top of the car. In fact, to make matters worse, I didn't discover my phone was missing until about 3 hours later. And then when I thought, now did I leave it at home? No, I know I didn't leave it at home. And I thought, and I remember, okay, when was the last time you remember seeing your phone? And it was when I laid it on top of the car. And then, I searched inside that car, in and out, no phone. So the moment I realized what had happened, guess what I did? I prayed. I prayed fervently. Now, folks, listen, a phone is not the most important thing in the world, because as Alex was pointing out, it can distract us, it can cause us headaches, but it is relatively important, especially if you have a lot of information, a lot of calendar information, a lot of appointment information, a lot of phone numbers and so forth on your phone, which most of us do. All right, so I prayed. Number one, I prayed 3 prayers. Number one, that by God's help I would find it. Number 2, that I would find it before somebody else did. Sometimes people who find phones will really try to find the owner. Other people won't. They'll actually try to get information from the phone if they can, and if they can't, they just keep the phone and try to just erase it and just have their own phone. So I prayed I'd find it first. And thirdly, and this was very selfish of me, I prayed that it would still work fine. Well, about 7:30, 7:45 that night, with the help of God and Google GPS location services, I was able, on my computer, to locate the general area where the last signal of the phone was transmitted, where the phone bailed out, in other words. And although it was dark at that point in time on November 7th, Brenda, Alyssa, and I, we drove out to Moorville Road, just past Petersburg Road, and searched. But it was dark, a lot of traffic, so it was hard to see. So we gave up the search after about 35 minutes. Well, that night I prayed again, that I could find it before someone else, and that it would work. So the next morning, Tuesday morning at 7:45, I went back out to that area, continued to search. After 15 minutes, I saw what looked like a piece of glass on the side of the road. It turned out to be the case of my phone. The case that's on my phone right now, in fact, a clear case. Now, it's not easy to see a clear case, but the good news was, by finding the case, it told me that maybe the phone is in the vicinity. But then the possibility was there that the case had come off, the phone was free, and somebody had seen it and picked it up and took it. So I still didn't know, but it gave me a little promise. Maybe I'll find it. Well, 3 minutes later, looking on the north side of Moorville Road, I spotted something just kind of dark, funny looking, and it turned out to be my phone. 2 of the 3 prayers were answered. I found the phone. I found it before somebody else did. But when I picked it up, now I want you to know, and I have to watch this because it's actually being videoed, but on the back of my phone, the case received some considerable damage, to say the least. In fact, I have the same clear case. The clear case, is good shape, so I have it on. But I have to have the case on now, or else the phone would fall apart because of all the damage done to the phone case. The third prayer I prayed was it might still work. Well, it was drained of power when I got it. Tried to push the power button, nothing. So I took it home, charged it an hour. During that time, I prayed that it might still work. And then God answered the third prayer. It worked, despite the damage to the case. Worked fine. Everything functions perfectly. But then God answered another prayer. The case actually looks like the phone has been dropped from a tall building. All right? But the screen of the phone was unscratched. I mean, not even the slightest scratch. The screen is now it's a little dirty now with my fingerprint, but the screen of this phone, folks, is perfect. I've never heard of a case where a phone would take that sort of fall and tumbling on hard pavement several times to do that damage, and no damage to the screen. Now, I do have a screen protector on there, but I have a cheap one. It cost me like $2. So God answered a prayer I didn't even ask for. Okay, now that's the story. So you might say, all right, that's interesting. Well, what good came of it? Number one, sometimes our faith needs a little boost. My faith needed a little boost. And it received it. Because God answered the prayer. God didn't have to. God didn't have to make the phone findable. But I found it before someone else. It worked. And the screen is perfect. And it works fine. This is the phone I use. I had another one, but this is a little better to record the lessons. I'll continue to use it. Who knows how long. It really made me think. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I said, thank you, God. Because, and the screen part, as I said, most of our phones, if the screen is not work, if it's cracked beyond repair and the screen can't be replaced, we just discard the phone, right? That's very, very important. So I praise God for that. It really did. It gave my prayer life a shot in the arm. And number two, I learned a couple of good life lessons, such as I need to be very attentive when I'm in a hurry and I put anything on top of my car. And by the way, I learned that I also need to do something that I'd planned to do with this phone for like 3 months prior to this. I'd planned to put some sort of identification on the case or inside the case on the phone itself. So if somebody did find it, hopefully they'd be honest enough to try to make contact. So I have my name and Brenda's phone number, and I said it by Brenda's number. Now, this is not for a date. This is my wife. All right. Well, anyway, so I have that on my phone now. I just need to learn that. Put some identification on objects that, you might leave somewhere. People do that sometimes with their eyeglass or eyeglass case or whatever. But number three, maybe the most important thing that came of this, I was reminded of a special advantage that you and I as Christians have. You may remember, those of you who are older, like me, Timex used to have a great commercial on TV. They'd have a Timex watch, and they'd show a depiction of the Timex watch being dropped from a building or maybe flushed down the commode, whatever, or run over maybe by a large truck or even a steamroller. And then it showed this guy, he was a regular spokesman. He'd pick up the Timex watch, he'd listen, and then just say, hey, Timex watch, it takes a licking, but it keeps on ticking, all right? That's what my phone did. And that's a great example, illustration of the Christian life. Every one of us will undergo hardship at times. Jesus told us we would. John 16:33. In this world you'll have tribulation. The Apostle Paul, 2 Timothy 3, verse 12. All who would live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. We'll get banged up. Sometimes physically, emotionally, both. But that need not damage our faith and commitment to Jesus Christ. They can come out on top. I think the Apostle Paul was trying to communicate that to Christians who were struggling during his day. He talked about the apostles. Reading from 2 Corinthians 4, verses 8 and 9. He said, we are hard pressed on every side. Everybody was trying to get at them, not for good. But he said, yet not crushed. We are perplexed. Sometimes we don't know which way to turn. But not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. And then listen to his words, beginning at verse 16, 2 Corinthians 4. He said, therefore, we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing. And sometimes it was perishing because of persecution, because of being chased down and beaten. Yet the inward man, the soul, is being renewed, made new day by day for our light affliction. And if you knew their affliction, you would not consider it light. But Paul considered that. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment. Even if they're going to be tortured the rest of their lives, still this life is so short compared to eternity. He said, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight and glory. We have something so much better in heaven to look forward to. While we do not look at the things which are seen, the things going on around us, and sometimes things going on to us, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. We keep our gaze on a reward in heaven. It's a lesson I need to learn. We all do. In this world, as Christians, we will take a licking at times. But by the help of God and our determination, we will still continue ticking. Let's pray. Wonderful Father in heaven, thank you for everyone who's assembled here to worship you, to fellowship with one another, to remember Jesus and his death and the blood he shed on the cross, and to listen to your word and to try to learn more, that we can all grow more. Oh, Father, thank you for answering our prayers and the prayers you answered for me. And I guess, Father, as I remembered praying, and when those prayers were answered, I looked up and I said, Father, you did not have to answer those prayers as you did. Just finding the phone and knowing someone else didn't find it to obtain information off of it, that would have been enough and even more than I deserved for my carelessness. But you gave me so much more. But the phone itself was just an example, not only of your help and answers, but just to teach me. And I pray this will help us all. Job's story is far, far more important than 100 of these stories I've told could ever be, and certainly the Apostle Paul. We will have hardship. We will be beat up from time to time, as it were, physically or emotionally or both. But help us with your power to keep ticking, to keep going. And thank you for that. And it's in the name of Jesus Christ we pray these things. Amen. For the invitation, I just have to share. Yesterday I did a funeral for a lady whose husband, Dennis, I know very well from McDonald's. And I thank God I had the opportunity and was called upon to do the service for this family, because my goal in the funeral service was not to just render the service of presiding at a funeral, but to share Jesus Christ, which I did. That was the thrill of it for me. The chance to talk to people that I'd probably never have the opportunity to talk to about Jesus Christ, about Him being the only way to heaven, and about how no matter what else we have in this life, if we have heaven to look forward to, we've got it all, whether we live to be a short time. I'm going to actually preach a sermon based on some of the funeral lesson I did. But one man was so touched. His name is Greg. He lives in Manchester. He said, you know what? He said, I know now how uncertain this life is. And he said, I really want to be baptized. He said, I want to come talk to you. And so I want you to pray for Greg. I don't recall his last name, but I gave him my number. He's got my cell phone number, the church number, and information. But just the way he said, I just know now how uncertain this life is, and I want to be ready. I don't want to risk dying and thinking, why didn't I get ready? Lesson for the world. If there's anybody here this morning who has not been saved by the blood of Jesus Christ, who has not come to Jesus Christ to repent of sins, to confess His name, and to be baptized, we would ask you to do that.